Hello and welcome back, and that is right, today we're returning to the subject of UGREEN and the fact that in their App Center now you can download and install OpenClaw, just like any other app. They're one of the first mainstream NAS brands that I know of that have now allowed an OpenClaw app in their App Center there. And in this video, I'm going to be talking you through later on exactly how to install it and some of the capabilities it can do. Crucially, what it can't do, but more important than anything, just what the hell OpenClaw is in the context of NAS. Because realistically, you must have heard about OpenClaw in the last few months. It's absolutely exploded on the scene. And frankly, there are bigger and better platforms surrounding open source, surrounding AI that can tell you more about it than me. But I can talk about it in the context of NAS, what the benefits it can bring, but also some of the risks. So let's crack on with that first bit. What is OpenClaw? If you already know what it is, you know the risk. This isn't going to be like the bit at the start of the plane journey when they say to you, now you may have flown before, but you've got to listen to the rules. If you want to skip ahead, you can. There are chapters, but for everyone else, and I do recommend you check it out, OpenClaw is an assistant. It is ultimately the body without the brain. You still need an AI, whether that is you're going to be using Gemini or DeepSync or Grok or Llama or any of these other AIs, be they free or paid, you're going to still need that. So there's going to be a level of internet access. Now, if you are running a locally deployed AI, so whether you're using an IDX system from UGREEN where you can actually have that AI running on the system completely closed with no remote access, you can use that. Or you can run some AI systems, again, Llama, DeepSync on numerous NAS devices locally with no internet access. If you want to do that, you can use OpenClaw with that to get the job done. But keep in mind that this isn't, OpenClaw on its own is not an AI. It is a tool to use with AI. For the longest time, I've always said the only way I want AI on my NAS is when I can use it to say to the NAS, I want these files, do this task. Ultimately, to simplify the process of managing a NAS and data retrieval. Now, that is what DeepSync is for. It is the layer to instruct the AI effectively, and it learns as it goes. Ultimately, it is a more, for want of a better word, organic way for the NAS to be managed and ultimately to use human commands to retrieve data from your NAS as well as actioning things and processes. Now, why does that differ from a normal AI that you would deploy? Well, ultimately, a normal AI you deploy is an information resource tool. It is to retrieve. It's very hard to give it instructions for the NAS to deploy. There has to be something in the middle that the AI can pull the levers of. All that OpenClaw is doing is that in reverse. It is the levers. It is the functionality. Without something like that, AI, or OpenClaw on its own, is the mop from Fantasia, continuing to throw water on the ground and mopping up until the whole bloody place is flooded. But much like the gremlins, there are three key rules. Number one, backup, 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 backup. Because the thing with OpenClaw is, once you give it access to the system, a lot of the time it will not seek permission to do certain things. You can instruct it to work in certain ways and certain patterns and have certain guidelines. But the thing is, OpenClaw is trying to learn as it goes. And the result is, and it has been commonly seen online, accidental deletions, accidental corruptions, accidental modification of files. So make sure your data is backed the sod up. That's why in the initial stages of OpenClaw deployment, everyone was talking about remote PC deployment. It was about running it on a 24/7 cloud-based PC. At the same time, you had some people running it on completely separate Mac Minis and mini PCs and stuff like that. This is about running it on the NAS, which unfortunately is where your data is. Also shortens and reduces the latency hugely when it comes to the management of the data, but then there is the element of risk, so have a backup. Second rule, if you are utilizing a remote AI, so that means you are not going to be deploying the AI locally. If you're using one of the remote services, again, OpenAI, Gemini, etc., if you're going to do that, bear in mind you are giving the outside a huge amount of access to your system. Now, I know what you're thinking, who wants to see the pictures of my cats? Bear in mind, In some cases, it's going to be uploading file structure, behavioral information, logs and more, or real-time data, actual data that's going to be uploaded, downloaded to the system. So bear that in mind. By opening the door for these third-party remote AIs for OpenClaw to do the job, you don't have a huge amount of case-by-case control of the data that OpenClaw is going to be shoveling out the door and pulling back. Finally, RAM and minimum specs. Bear in mind you're going to need at least 8 gig of memory, because even though you're not running the AI locally, there's still a lot of memory consumption here. So again, nothing lower than the DXP 2800. That's running on an N100 CPU there. So forget the DH series. From what I understand, this isn't going to run on those, at least not at this time. And although they do have an NPU supported CPU in the form of those RK chip processors, bear in mind that it is recommended to not go any lower than the DXP 2800, but from that, the sky's the ceiling. And lastly, less a rule, more of a guideline. Bear in mind, if you are going to be running a locally deployed AI LLM alongside DeepSync, bear in mind that a lot of the features and facilities that people are touting are absolutely brilliant about OpenClaw. Some of the remote management there, using like WhatsApp to send messages and stuff like that, you just can't use them because you're going to be severing the device off. These only work if you are providing remote access, and therefore remote access to some of the task-based management tools that you're going to be plugging in. This is not unlike when people were losing their minds over IFTTT, if this stand that, when that rolled around, and it was a bridging mechanic for different apps and services where you did A, which led to B, and the result was C. This is no different than that. If you're going to be taking advantage of the whole feature set of OpenClaw, you're going to require internet access. And if that doesn't sound desirable to you and you want to run it on a local LLM, know that that's going to open up the gateway to data analysis. It's going to be open up file finding, trend analysis of local data, but that's really it. But that's enough of the old T&C. Let's get down to it. Move that off the table. We've already got an 8-bay UGREEN NAS already set up just off camera. And I'm going to talk you through how to install OpenClaw, how to connect a third-party LLM, and some details on skills and also recommended guides. So let's head over to the screen now. I've already got 2 instances set up with this. Just to let you know, you can do this either via the client application that's available for both Windows and Mac, but I'm going to be doing all of this via the web browser for simple reason that when you do get OpenClaw up and running, generally a lot of the back-end OpenClaw stuff is done via the web browser. The first half of it you can do within the client, but not all of it, as which will become clear later. Now, I've updated this device. You may see that I've got the UGREEN AI tool here. That's model management tool, but this is not the AI NAS. If you want, you can take advantage of this on pretty much any NAS as mentioned, other than the DH series. But I will say, if you do use the AI NAS devices like the IDX system, that is going to allow you to deploy a local LLM rather than using a third-party one here. I'm using this that's running on an i5, but you can do this apparently right the way down to an N100 powered NAS like the DXP 2800. So first things first, we do want to create some directories. So go into the shared folder area or into the personal folder. Doesn't really matter which one you want to use, but let's do a personal folder, for example. On this one, we can go ahead and just create a folder. We'll just call this one OpenClaw Data. And again, create that there. Alternatively, you can do exactly the same thing in a shared folder, but from here, you click the plus, go to a shared folder, give it a name. So we'll call that one OpenClaw Data Share. From there, make sure that your admin user, or at the very least your power user, has got access to this. And we've created our folder. The other thing you're going to need to do, if you haven't already created it, is a folder for Docker. So again, same process. I would put that in a share, by the way, but just make sure you don't accidentally, give anything access to it that you really shouldn't. One of the main reasons you're going to need to create a separate directory is during the course of the installation of OpenClaw, it's also going to, by default, install Docker. So if you haven't already got that installed, it will create it and you will need to create a directory for that. So now we've done that, we can head into the application center, and if you have installed the latest version of UGOS, so they had an update in the last day or so, but you have to make sure, I believe you have to be over version 1.15. Let's have a quick version. We're on 1.15 because although this has rolled out, the most up-to-date UI experience you're going to see, and again will become clear, runs from 1.15 of UGOS. And as you can see down there, there is OpenClaw. So we open that up and we literally just click install and it will go ahead and install it on an area of storage. Now, I'm installing this on an area of storage made up of SSDs, but I'm not using M.2 NVMe. I could, but what I'm choosing to use is a bunch of SATA SSDs that I've RAIDed together. They're very, very small SSDs, and also a big old legacy pile of hard drives there running, giving me 25 TB of storage. But again, ideally you want to run OpenClaw and indeed any AI service from superfast SSD. You can use SATA, but again, if you're not using M.2 NVMe's for caching, then that is an option you've got. Just make sure you install OpenClaw on an area of SSD. Workspace path, this is going to be the sandbox with which OpenClaw is going to run. That was the directory that we created earlier on. So again, can be a user folder, can be a shared folder. Go ahead and click confirm. From there, you need to give it file access path. Now, this is going to be the area of storage that you're allowing OpenClaw to be able to manage and also create or destroy. Again, as mentioned earlier on, security is key, but that's really down to you and your setup. For me, I've created a directory for test data, but for you, it might be slightly different. Next, the gateway token. Now, the gateway token is your doorway. It's the key for the lock. It's the password you're going to use for OpenClaw access. Now, again, this is separate from the NAS, but just make sure you don't lose this password. Along the bottom there, you've got pretty much all of the guidance and points I mentioned earlier on. And as you can see, it goes through a lot of what it can and can't do, as well as interjection and connection with third-party messaging services as well, where a lot of the control comes in. You may also have noticed this thing, Minimax model. We'll come back around to that in a little while, but again, there is a free trial available to you if you want to use this, but we'll come around to that later on. And there you go. It's now going to carry on installing OpenClaw there in the background. Now again, depending on your internet connection, because it is a gigabyte almost in size, how long this takes will really come down to you and your ISP. But in the meantime, I just wanted to highlight a few guides that I used a few months ago when I was deploying OpenClaw on a few different systems. Again, most of the guides that I'm going to recommend here are irrespective of which NAS brand you use, but these give you a great on-ramp beyond the installation of OpenClaw to walk you through. This video is more about deploying it on a UGREEN NAS, and after that, some of the more extensive stuff where you can use the OpenClaw agent as your personal assistant is really where these guides really came into fruition for me. There's a Reddit thread here that has been amended, has been added to. It's a full setup guide there walking you through exactly how to set it up. You can ignore the first, I would say, quarter, because a lot of this is about installing on a Mac Mini, but after that, a lot more of the skills, a lot more of the layout and the groundwork that you're going to need to set it up for the first time for that kind of native access and assistance is really useful. And also 2 YouTube videos that I watched. They're pretty long ones, to be fair. This one here, the Ultimate Beginner's Guide to OpenClaw. Again, you can start this video, I would argue, somewhere around the 18 to 20 minute mark. But from there, it allows you to setting up the workspace, setting up a lot of the access, setting up a lot of the rules between you and the AI agent you're creating. And similarly, this video here, again, made for Mac Mini deployments there, but it can be applicable to others. Walking you through, you can go beyond the initial installation because that is a lot of what the UGREEN installation does for you. And you can go straight back into setting it up with your third-party messaging service in order to back and forth with the NAS over OpenClaw using the AI LLM that you've connected. And earlier on, I mentioned Minimax. That's the AI product of choice that UGREEN in the initialization of this device was highlighting. You can get hold of a trial of that. Again, you can head over to there. There's lots of stuff to do with their token plan because, again, the complexity of the API calls you're going to be making, by the way, does make a difference, but you can go ahead and sign up with a Google account or something like that very easily and get a trial plan. Again, I'm not recommending it. I've not really used it personally that much. You can still use OpenAI or even Google Gemini, depending if you're using the Flash model or not. More on that later on. But still, nonetheless, I just thought it was worth giving it a little token nod because it is mentioned a lot of their details online. Once the OpenClaw installation has completed on the UGREEN, you can go ahead and click open. But just before you do that, later on, you might find the need that you're going to have to edit certain files on a command line. You may be going to need to go into some of the systems and settings of OpenClaw to edit things on the NAS side, stuff that will be covered in some of those other guides that I referenced earlier on. Now, if you try to do it within the App Center here, you're not really going to get much to play with. Although you can see the configurations and areas that I've granted access to, that's really it for what you can do within this. And again, not a vast amount there. But if you head into the Docker application, from there, you're able to find both the project and the container there. And from here, you can go ahead and go into the settings menu and adapt some of these features and services, whether that is you want to go into the terminal line or you want to go ahead and ensure that you've got the right level of access. Case in point, as you can see with permissions, this has a container that doesn't have permissions mode applied. This has that level of access. You can play around with some of these settings, but you have to turn the container off in order to edit some of these. So while you've got OpenClaw running, you can't affect a lot of these changes. I just wanted to show them here in case you do need to adapt some stuff in the background. The same goes if you go into the files area where the OpenClaw data is being created. So if we go into the OpenClaw share that we created earlier on, there isn't anything in it right now. Two reasons for that. Number one, you may need to go into the settings menu there and ensure that hidden files are being shown. Alternatively, as the OpenClaw installation is created, files are going to be dumped into these directories where you will be able to see how the OpenClaw assistant thinks, and you can tailor a lot of those in the background. But going back to OpenClaw, open it up and it opens up into a brand new tab. Again, let's log out of that there. You can go ahead, let's reopen it, go ahead and click open, and then from there you enter that gateway token, that password we created earlier on. Bear in mind, as mentioned earlier on, the reason I'm not using the client application is because if you try to use OpenClaw in the client, it will still open in the web browser there. So let's go ahead and enter the password I created earlier. And from here, we can see the dashboard. This tells us how long it's been running, CPU utilization, memory utilization. From here, we'll go into the model provider section shortly. And finally, the channel, something else I'll go through in brief detail later on, how to add those messaging services so you can communicate with your assistant later on. And again, monitoring the logs, that sort of thing, everything that's happening there in the background. So the next thing we need to do is go into that model provider area. Now, click Add Provider, and from here we can get ready to start adding our AI of choice. And profiles have already been created for some of the leading, more obvious AI LLMs and models in the market right now. Now, for example, here's the Google AI Studio. If you've created a Google account, which let's face it, you're alive, you probably have at one point. From there, you can use that account and connect it to the Google Gemini service. And then from there, you can go to the Google AI Studio, and on the left hand side, go ahead and you will find at the bottom, get API key. I'm not going to show it here because then I would expose my API key here on the channel. The same goes if you want to use something like OpenAI. OpenAI has OpenAI.com's platform settings, allows you to dig in and get yourself an AI key. And then from there, you can head back into the installation and select the AI model you're going to choose to use. So let's go with Google Gemini. From there, it will automatically select the base URL. This is the call it's going to need. It's the doorway to communicate with the remote AI of choice. And then from there, you can enter your AI key there at the bottom. As you can see, the protocol, depending on what you're utilizing, and this is where it can get complicated, depending on that third-party remote AI that you've got in place that you're going to need to play with. The last thing I'll add, if you are going to utilize an IDX system, bear in mind if you're going to run a local AI, chances are that AI with its own API issued key, you're going to find within the AI services. So within the UGREEN settings, within the model management settings that you're already downloading onto the AI NAS, something that's absent here because this is not an AI NAS. But if you run that local AI model on that system, then you need to use that API key and that local access base URL, which is going to be an IP, so a numerical, not a traditional web address, alongside that API, and then enter the details there. And then hopefully the model will appear there as an option there at the bottom. If the model you've set up or the AI model you've deployed locally on your NAS isn't there, you are able to add a model manually there. But of course, depending on that model you're going to be utilizing and the token and API call kind of deal usage rights that you're utilizing, whether it's free or paid, that's really where things are going to get complicated. So again, use those guides I recommended earlier. Once you've gone ahead and entered your API key, click Save. And then from there, it is now issuing a pathway between this NAS and Openclaw and that remote AI. Again, remember what we're doing right now is communicating and allowing access to a third-party off-site AI. Keep it safe, people. Finally, as mentioned, because a lot of the AI models are already on the pre-listed drop-down, alongside that, UGREEN have already tailored inside certain AI. So I would recommend the Flash model if you can, but just keep in mind again usage and credits, and then click Save. Later on in Openclaw, there is a huge variety of AI models that you can choose between once you've set up an AI API call gateway and a key. But for now, we've got everything saved, or we can go ahead and click Open Openclaw. From there, a new window will open up. You'll have to use that gateway token once again to enter the Openclaw UI. And from here, it goes straight into the assistant. You'll know if it's the correct one because there at the top, the default will be listed. Now, from here, we've got a number of options. We can go ahead and monitor and double check that the AI LLM that we've connected to is established, as you can see here with Openclaw. And from here, you can also go in to add skills. And we'll come back around to skills in just a moment. But what about communication and using your phone? Now, you can utilize, again, Telegram or WhatsApp if you choose to issue commands and instructions and conversation with your assistant and set it up directly from within Openclaw. However, the UGREEN application and the UI packaging of this has actually done a nice job of enabling channels to be set up within the agent console. From here, you can go ahead and say, for example, I want to enable WhatsApp on my phone. I can go ahead, click WhatsApp, and then from there, it will invite me to set up a user for the first time. So from there, I've already got it set up. So before you get a QR login, you have to go in and add a channel. So from here, we create our WhatsApp channel, and from here, enter that information. So from here, for example, we're creating a pairing account. So this is going to be pairing your mobile device with Openclaw to issue instructions to the assistant. And then you need to add the number that you're going to be choosing to use alongside your area code. Once you've got that set up, I'm obviously not going to show that here on screen. It will then allow you to go in to the QR login area, which you can't do right now without being set up. But for you, once you've entered your phone number, it will generate a 3D barcode, which you can then go into WhatsApp, into Telegram, into Discord, scan that, and enable you to create a portaled access point to issue commands to Openclaw and therefore direct and control the NAS. If you're wondering about whether the AI and the Openclaw agent are in communication, simply go into the chat window and just say hello and just, again, start the conversation. So, for example, what are you running on? Bear in mind, depending on if you're using a free AI service, for example, you may have a limited number of calls that you can use. Then the server may be overburdened. As you can see, it's letting you know what it's running on and the model that it's running on. From here, you can start playing around with some of the features and services. Now, a lot of them, I would argue, when it comes to NAS, very specifically to NAS, snap that to the left of the screen, will heavily be dependent on different apps and services because Openclaw is made as an AI assistant. It's not primarily made for NAS, and that's why a lot of users run it on a 24/7 cloud VM somewhere rather than on a NAS with the data because of the security implications. But within a UGREEN NAS, if you want to get real-time controls with the data and the hardware in question, setting up alerts, setting up shares, getting real-time information, that's where it's really coming into its own. So from here, as you can see, I've already listed, this will all be listed in the description below, by the way, setting it up, models to use for different remote LLMs, as well as the UGREEN Easy mode there using Minimax. But when it comes to skills, these are going to be the ones I'd recommend to get you started with. So for example, web browsing and system monitor and file system. Now these sound obvious and just words, but these, once you go into the applications database, so they call them skills on this system, and a number of them are pre-installed by default, by the way. The level and extent you can use will depend on the remote AI that you've paired with the the Openclaw service. But from that, you can browse the skills store. And in the skills store, you can do something as simple as literally just type in the word NAS, and then this will give you plugins and skills that you can inject into Openclaw. But again, bear in mind, you are still talking about an AI agent having access to all of your data and having all of your system and potentially a gateway into your network. We do, of course, have to acknowledge the anathema and kind of the inconsistency that is utilizing OpenClaw on a NAS to make things easier when the first time setup of OpenClaw and just generally wrapping your head around its utilization is going to be complicated. For example, this is a brief chat that I went through with the system utilizing OpenClaw connected at different times to a Google AI and an OpenAI agent. And utilizing this, I wanted to see just how much, if I was asking the most base user-friendly questions and answering and talking to the device like a person here on the chat, to set up the device. Again, setting up SMB level access, monitoring the device, installing different skills. All of this has happened organically within a chat, but I still needed to have the questions and understand some of the utility of some of the questions. For example, I want to create a new user to set up on this NAS, a guest that's got read-only access to the data. And in the background, because I've granted access to the OpenClaw assistant, it's going through the process there in the background, but it's doing it via command line, which is great because if I was setting up on the NAS, I would have had to go into the individual settings and know where a lot of these settings are, going into user management and creating some of that. Now, that is a user-friendly thing that I can do on the desktop, which they're obviously taking a little bit more of a complicated method there in the background in command line, but that's how chat works, or the OpenAI agent as well. The level of complexity and the questions you can ask are really going to come down to several things. One, the level of knowledge that you have about the NAS, the level of skill set that you choose to use, because as you can see, there are already lots of skills pre-added and being explored within the skills and plugin repository over at OpenClaw, and then having those up and running within the AI agent inside the OpenClaw UI. What I'm saying is, this is going to make things a great deal easier for a lot of users, but there's still going to be those earlier little step-ups, which we're going to be exploring in a larger video, I think, because notwithstanding UGREEN and their application of OpenClaw, I do think there are inherent benefits to be explored here, utilizing this assistant to then use the power of an AI under its control to allow easier setup and access. And then, of course, when you're starting to take advantage of things like Telegram, of things like WhatsApp, to be able to manage these things in a convenient fashion, like you would with any assistant in the real life. Again, there's a lot to like here. But once again, just keep in mind that if you want to run OpenClaw really, really securely, it is going to mean that pretty regularly you're going to be told by the system that it can't get the job done for you. And you're going to have to go and take the long way around in order to either give this system access to be able to get stuff done, or you're going to have to run the commands just like you would from a normal chat assistant, and therefore kind of invalidating the need for an assistant if you're going to be doing this stuff yourself. If ever you're in doubt about the applications and services that you should install on your OpenClaw enabled UGREEN NAS, then you can literally just ask the agent. You can just flat out say, what are the best apps and services and skills and plugins that you recommend I use? And it will come up with options. Alternatively, again, you can use the Claw Hub to find some great options there. Once you do find one, you can go ahead, find out more information about it, check its legitimacy, because you generally find that suspicious plugins are removed by default. But also on top of that, you can go ahead and it goes through exactly how to install it. So for example, go ahead and copy it, and then you can just enter it directly into the chat. But again, depending on the level of access, the level of security that you've given the system, as you can see on screen, it will either ask for permission every single time, or you can always allow it to do the job. And the choice you make between these two options is crucial, because moving forward, it's going to establish the relationship you have between yourself and OpenClaw in controlling your NAS. Now, over time, what I want to see UGREEN integrate into the OpenClaw agent console is a lot more of the configuration. At the moment, it is incredibly top layer, relying on OpenClaw's own user interface, own controls there in the background for a lot of the management. And don't get me wrong, that is very, very useful, but it is still incredibly tech heavy. No matter what people tell you online that OpenClaw can be set up easily, and I'll be honest, the installation is easy. Everything else afterwards is tremendously complicated and fraught with security and danger. So know what you are doing, and hopefully over time UGREEN will integrate a lot of these features and services and configuration options and more into that OpenClaw agent console, because as they get vetted, as they get configured and optimized within UGOS, I think that can only work to its benefit there, and therefore allow most users to be able to have a much more streamlined, easy way to set up their NAS for the very first time, but also use it day to day. But thank you so much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this. If you have, let me know below. I'll link not only to some of the skills that I recommend to run with an OpenClaw and also the guides that I personally used to get my own OpenClaw set up and running. But on top of that, I do strongly recommend below finding out the guides, as I'll be updating over time as other NAS brands start integrating with this, sure, but also with this own little project that I'm going to be working on. And I want to see just how far UGREEN are going to take this. But thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.